Hi guys, Olive here. Here today to talk about what I read during Nonfiction November 2022. Nonfiction November was quite the month, as it always is. And just very quickly before I get started talking about the books, I wanted to take a moment to thank everyone for participating, or even if you couldn't participate, just for supporting Nonfiction November. This has become an enormous event. It gets bigger and bigger every single year. I can safely say I had no idea what I was getting started back in 2015, but I am so glad that it reaches so many people. And I am so overwhelmed every single year by the amount of enthusiasm that people have for Nonfiction November, how much they look forward to it, how much they look forward to hearing the prompts every single year, how much it changes people's reading lives. This event requires a tremendous amount of work on my end. I start getting ready for Nonfiction November in September, and it essentially takes over my life until December rolls around. So it's a lot of work, but getting the feedback from people, just how much they love it, how much they plan for it, it really motivates me to keep going because it means a lot to other people. And honestly, it means a lot to me too. So thank you so much. But I'm not just the host of Nonfiction November. I am also a participant. I try to make sure to allow myself to have time to actually do some reading, to get to participate in the event that I'm hosting and not just be doing all the hosting duties the entire month long. So I did read a large amount of nonfiction books this year. I was able to dedicate a lot of time to reading, and every single November over the past however many years, I've decided to dedicate my entire November reading month to reading nonfiction. You don't have to do that for Nonfiction November. That's just what I like to do since I already read a good amount of nonfiction every single month. It's a good challenge for me. But a lot of the books that I read during the month of November, I've already talked about or reviewed here on my channel. So those books I'm only going to lightly cover in this video, and I'm going to focus my attention on sharing my thoughts on those books that I haven't yet discussed here on the channel. The first book is one of those ones that I haven't discussed anywhere else yet. It was also one of my TBR books. It's called Newsroom Confidential by Margaret Sullivan. This is a memoir of the author's long career in journalism, starting off with how she wanted to become a journalist during her younger years, then how she became the editor of her local news, the Buffalo News, then how she was asked to become the 5th public editor of the New York Times, and once that stint was done, how she moved on to the Washington Post. But as she's going along in her own personal timeline throughout this memoir, she's also talking about the major news events of the day and what her reactions were to the way that the press handled their coverage of said events. She does this a lot when she's talking about her time at the New York Times, because her job as public editor was essentially to be the reader's representative or a kind of ethics watchdog, making sure that the reader's concerns were being heard and that all reporting being done at the New York Times was being done fairly and honestly. And since she was the public editor of the New York Times while coverage for the 2016 American election was going on, she has a lot to say about that in this book. I really did enjoy getting her takes on that, and I particularly liked hearing what she thinks journalists should be doing given the current political climate. But I have to say, it's all very oddly placed in what is supposed to be a memoir. I think Margaret Sullivan may have been better off just writing a book about journalism and how she has seen it evolve over the decades, because I know that her entire life has been about working for newspapers, writing for newspapers, but the work dominates this memoir. And at least it's my impression that when you're reading a memoir, you're supposed to be hearing about someone's life and like who they are as a person, and we didn't get much of anything personal from her in this book. I think we would have needed some more of the personal details in order to make this a stronger memoir. I don't think it's a bad book, but I do think it needed to pick a lane. But the next memoir that I'm going to discuss, I loved so much that I structured an entire video around it here on my channel. It's called I've Had to Think Up a Way to Survive by Lynn Melnick. In this book, the author discusses all the ups and downs of her own personal history as she's simultaneously discussing the life and career of the musician Dolly Parton. This book is so moving. It is so invigorating. It's one of the best memoirs I've read in a really long time. In case you missed it, I talked more about this book in a video I made all about underhyped memoirs that you may have never even heard of before. I will link that video for you in the description box below and up in the cards if you want to hear me talk more about this book. But another TBR book that I finished for Nonfiction November is called Like, Comment, Subscribe by Mark Bergen, which is a history of this platform. platform, YouTube, from its early days on the internet to being acquired by Google and beyond. This book is so massive, just subject matter-wise, that I don't even know how to summarize it effectively. And therein lies the problem. I probably don't need to tell you this, but YouTube is huge, and there is so much to say about it. I feel like entire books could have been written just based on any one of the topics covered in this book. I feel like they each deserved their own book because the topics are so big. Things like its early days on the internet, the transition to being part of Google, issues with advertisers, troubles with trying to keep disturbing content off of YouTube, its role in the spread of misinformation, the scandals of big creators. I feel like when I was reading this book, it felt like I was reading several other books that had been Frankenstein together. I will give it credit for giving me a really interesting behind the scenes look at this platform where I've spent so much of my time as both a viewer and a creator. But I think ultimately it was just trying to do too much. And because of that, I don't think I got what I came for. But the next Nonfiction November TBR book that I checked off my list was The Milky Way by Moya McTier, which is a very entertaining look at the history of our galaxy, told as though the Milky Way was telling its own life story. The author gives the Milky Way a very sassy personality, and that approach allows her to put some very high-level concepts into layman's terms, which really helped me finally be able to get a grip on this area of science that has always intimidated me. I spoke more about this book in a video review I did here on my channel. I will link it for you in the description box below and up in the cards in case you missed it. But I also read one more space-related nonfiction book during the month of November, and that was called Wild Ride by Haley Arsenault. This is a memoir. The author is a childhood cancer survivor, and she got to go on the first all-civilian mission to orbit back in 2021. In this book, she shares her story, everything from being diagnosed with bone cancer at age 10, everything it took to fight that cancer while she was a patient at St. Jude's, and then discovering how much St. Jude's meant to her, and realizing that she wanted to grow up to work at St. Jude's. So she worked extremely hard to become a physician assistant and did eventually get her dream job, and also started working as a kind of spokesperson for the hospital, telling her story, fundraising for the hospital all around the world. And because she had a history of doing that, they offered her a spot on this Inspiration 4 mission that was going to orbit. And the entire mission was intended to raise money to fight childhood cancer. Preparing for that mission was very intense, as you can imagine. She talks about that in this memoir, and she also discusses how simultaneously spectacular and scary those 3 days she spent in space actually were. This is one of the most unique memoirs I have ever read. It was so interesting. I will not lie to you, I struggled more than a little bit, emotionally speaking, during the first half of this memoir, hearing what it was like going through cancer so young. Kids going through terrifying things like that, it just shatters me. But this author has such an amazing outlook. She doesn't regret going through cancer because she values life so much more now because she nearly lost her life so young. A feeling of gratitude absolutely radiates off of this author, and you will feel it the entire way through this memoir. She's like a ball of sunshine. She has this zest for life. She wants to experience the world. She loves to travel, but then she also really wants to help people through her work as a PA, but then also the work that she does for St. Jude's, raising money for them. She is, in one word, an inspiration. The best part of this memoir isn't actually the space stuff, although that is super cool. The best part of this book is getting to know the author. I must admit, though, the writing in this book falls pretty flat. There is no flash to it. She worked with a ghostwriter or co-writer, so it's just very to the point. It's very matter of fact. There's not a lot of beauty in the language, but there is so much joy in her story. There is so much inspiration to be found in this memoir. I ended up just not caring what the writing was like. This one is definitely worth a read. But I also finally picked up Catch and Kill by Ronan Farrow, which is the author's story of how he attempted to cover the many allegations made against movie producer Harvey Weinstein, but how the producer attempted to use his influence within his own industry and his power beyond even that to try to keep this story from coming out. Thank you so much to everyone who encouraged me in the comment section of my Nonfiction November TBR video to give the audiobook version of this one a try. I ended up bouncing back and forth between an audiobook I got from the library and my library book sale copy that I got not too long ago. I did that as my schedule allowed, and I am so glad I did. It was such a good audiobook. You can definitely tell that he's the child of performers, because I don't know many nonfiction book authors who, number one, narrate their own audiobooks, but then two, do different voices for the different people. He could have a second career as a voice actor, but then again, he's also a good writer. He's good on screen. He's a lawyer. He's a very impressive person generally. This book is great. It is definitely a different experience than She Said, which covers the same topic. I discussed how the two of them compare as I was discussing this book in my Nonfiction Books I Shouldn't Have Slept On video, a video I made for the purpose of shaming myself so that I will stop putting off reading high-profile nonfiction books. So if you want to hear more of my thoughts on this book, how it compares to She Said, or if you want to see any of the other nonfiction books I don't think I should have waited to read for so long, I will link that video for you in the description box below and up in the cards. But during the month of November, I also reviewed Matthew Perry's new memoir called Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing, in which he discusses his early life, finding fame, and battling his nearly lifelong addiction issues. It is definitely not the perfect book, but I found it to be shockingly honest. If you missed my video review that I did, I will link that for you in the description box below and up in the cards. But after I read Matthew Perry's memoir, I decided that I would also read a book that I owned all about the TV show Friends. I figured that there'd be some good overlap there. And that gave me this really wild idea to read not just that book on Friends, but to read a whole bunch of other books about movies and TV shows that I either owned or at least knew about so that I could make a video about all of them. I told absolutely no one about my plan to do this. I wanted to keep it a secret just in case I wasn't able to get it done. But I was a woman obsessed the entire month long. I had already read 2 books in the past that I could highlight in that video, but I wanted to round it out, make it a nice even 10. So I read 8 books on movies and TV during the month of November to get this video done. I read that one on Friends, which was called I'll Be There For You by Kelsey Miller. I also read one on Grey's Anatomy called How to Save a Life by Lynette Rice. I read 2 books on HBO shows. There was Sex and the City and Us by Jennifer Cation Armstrong and All the Pieces Matter by Jonathan Abrams, which discusses The Wire. I read 2 books on movies, Bring It On by Case Wickman and Fifth Avenue 5 a.m. by Sam Wasson, which is about Breakfast at Tiffany's. And then finally, I rounded out the entire list with 2 different books about sketch shows. Live from New York, which is of course about SNL, and Homie Don't Play That, which is about In Living Color. The culmination of that entire project was a video that I made in which I discussed all 8 of these plus the additional 2, all books about movies and TV shows. I am so intensely proud of that video. It took so much work, but I am really glad I did it because I think it's one of the best videos I've made in a really long time. So if you'd like to hear more about any of these books or the other 2, or if you just want to see something that I am very, very proud of, I will link that video for you in the description box below and up in the cards. So that was all the reading I did during Nonfiction November. I'm honestly surprised, maybe a little bit impressed that I managed to read all of these books in addition to spearheading this event. Pretty happy with how that went, but I would love to hear how your Nonfiction November went. What did you read? What were the best books of the month? Did you get the challenges done if you wanted to? Are you planning to participate next year? I'd love to hear any or all of that down in the comment section below. All the books that I mentioned today and all the links that I promised you will be in the description box below. If you're on a mobile device, just tap the title of this video and that will expand for you. And at the bottom of that exact same description box, you'll see links to everywhere you can find me around the internets, like Goodreads and Instagram, the 2 places where I'm the most active, in case you would like to keep up with what I am reading and writing about right now. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for another wonderful Nonfiction November. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.